Minnesota Somali fraud, feeding our future, a $1 billion welfare scandal. You've seen these words slapped across headlines and in political speeches, but what actually happened? How do you go from free meals for kids and housing support for vulnerable people to one of the biggest fraud stories in Minnesota's history, if not the entire United States of America? In this video, I'm going to walk you through the money trail step by step, show you how the schemes worked, and most importantly, how Minnesota's own systems helped let all of this happen. So let's start with the program you've probably heard the most about, Feeding Our Future. During COVID, the federal government opened the fire hose on money for school meals. The idea was simple. If schools are closed, families are hurting. We still need to feed kids. So money started flowing through nonprofits that would sponsor meal sites and get reimbursed for every meal served. In Minnesota, a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future became one of those sponsors. They signed up restaurants, community centers, daycares, all kinds of sites that on paper were feeding thousands of children every single day. Keyword, on paper. According to federal prosecutors, a huge part of that paper was complete fiction. Here's how it allegedly worked. A group would register as a meal site under Feeding Our Future. They'd submit rosters claiming to serve staggering number of kids, sometimes more children than actually lived in the area. They'd turn in receipts, invoices, and attendance sheet that looked official enough to pass a quick review. The government would then reimburse those claims, millions upon millions of dollars worth of claims. But when investigators finally dug in, they saw that they found things like copy-pasted names, made-up kids, and photos that were staged to show activity. The money that was supposed to pay for actual food instead went to luxury homes, high-end cars, trips, jewelry, overseas properties, and even supposedly terrorism. One defendant alone is accused of pulling in tens of millions of dollars through these fake meal claims. That's not the total scheme, by the way. That's just one person's slice. When you add up all of the charges in the Feeding Our Future case, prosecutors say more than $250 million in federal child nutrition funds were stolen or misused. $250 million that was supposed to feed low-income kids during a pandemic. It's absolutely sickening. And as bad as that is, that's only chapter one. While all of this was happening, Minnesota launched another big initiative, Housing Stabilization Services through Medicaid. The goal on paper is great. Help people with disabilities and vulnerable adults stay housed by paying for support services. Things like helping them manage rent, find housing, stay connected to healthcare. But again, there's a gap between the mission and what allegedly happened. Providers could bill Medicaid for visits and support activities. In a tight system, you'd expect detailed notes, verification, and audits. In Minnesota's real-world system, investigators say some providers figured out they could basically print money. They would sign people up, sometimes with minimal screening, then they'd submit claim after claim for home visits, support sessions, and housing help that were extremely minimal or never actually delivered. Case notes were recycled, documentation was generic, and for a long time, the state of Minnesota kept on paying. When the state's own U.S. attorney later looked at the numbers, he described Minnesota as drowning in fraud, direct quotes, and suggested that a huge share of the money flowing through that housing program may have been fraudulent. So now we've got a child nutrition program and a housing stabilization program, both bleeding money through fake or inflated claims. And then there's a third piece, Autism services. In this set of cases, some providers allegedly enrolled children in intensive autism therapy even when the diagnosis was shaky or outright wrong, then billed for far more therapy hours than actually happened. In some reports, families were allegedly given kickbacks or gift cards to keep their kids enrolled and the billing flowing. Again, the pattern is the same. The system pays first and asks detailed questions much later. So when you hear people throwing around the billion-dollar fraud line, what they're usually doing is stacking these three cases together: Feeding Our Future, Housing Stabilization, and Autism Services. Plus, there's some other related schemes in the mix, and it's being collated into one giant number. The exact figure depends on who you ask and what they include, but we're clearly talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in allegedly fraudulent claims. The obvious question is, how did Minnesota let this get so big, before anyone slammed on the brakes? Well, there are three big structural problems that come up again and again. The first is speed over scrutiny. Now remember, during COVID, the message from Washington was basically get the money out the door. Don't let bureaucracy slow down help for kids and families. Minnesota agencies were under pressure to move fast. Governor Walz believed the same exact thing. When Feeding Our Future and its partners started submitting explosive growth in meal counts, some staff did raise flags, but in a pay now, review later environment, those red flags didn't get automatically looked at and they never led to any shutoffs. The second problem is siloed oversight. The Children Nutrition Program, the Medicaid Housing Program, Autism Services, they are all administered by different offices and departments. They often use different IT systems, different rules, and different contractors. That means patterns that would look obviously suspicious if you saw the whole picture, well, they can stay invisible when each agency is only looking at its one little slice. Imagine three separate departments all seeing a provider that suddenly grows 10 or 20-fold in a year. Each one thinks, that's kind of weird, but nobody's job is to tie those threads together and ask, why is this one organization suddenly touching all of these programs at once? The third problem is weak or delayed on-the-ground checks. On paper, programs like these usually have requirements for site visits, monitoring, and audits. In practice, especially during COVID and in years right after, a lot of that oversight happened late, not at all. A site claiming to feed 10,000 children in a small neighborhood might go months before anyone actually shows up and counts ahead. A housing provider billing for hundreds of visits might never get a surprise call to verify that those visits happened. If your system is basically accept the pay work, pay the claim, and maybe audit a tiny sample years later, you've built a system where fraud is not just possible, it's profitable and likely. And that's really what's at the heart of the Minnesota story. When investigators finally went in, when law enforcement started serving search warrants, pulling bank accounts, and talking to real clients, they didn't uncover some genius Ocean's 11 style mastermind. They found something worse. A loose, undefended system that ordinary people could exploit using inflated numbers, easily identified forged documents, and the assumption that nobody was really watching, because nobody was. Now, you've probably heard all this packaged under one loaded phrase, Minnesota Somali fraud. That phrase does two things at once. It points at real cases because, yes, many, if not the majority of the defendants in these schemes are Somali or Somali American, but there are others who are not. But it also acts as political branding. It lets people wrap complex program failures, multiple fraud cases, and an entire community into one simple, emotionally charged label. In this video, I'm not interested in the hashtags. And more important, I'm interested in the mechanics because those mechanics exist in every single state. Anywhere you have big federal dollars, rushed rollouts, states administering those funding, fragmented oversight, weak verification, you have ingredients for the next Feeding Our Future. So what are the takeaways for you as a taxpayer, as a voter, or as someone who works around government programs? First, giant numbers in the news rarely come from one magic scam. They just don't. They come from some basic playbook repeated over and over and over again across different programs. They overstate the numbers. They fake paperwork. They count on nobody checking in real time because once again, a lot of times nobody is. Second, the real fix isn't one or more press conferences. It's boring stuff like shared data systems, real-time analytics, MOAs, mandatory on-site checks, and empowering frontline staff to say, no, this doesn't pass the smell test, or stop payment now until we can verify. Third, if you only focus on the ethnicity or background of the people charged, you miss the part that actually protects your money, how the system itself failed and what's being done to harden it. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want more content that goes beyond the slogans and really explains how government fraud actually works, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe to this channel. It does us a big help, and drop a comment below with what you want me to cover next. And if you got any questions, got any thoughts, write them below and I'll try to answer them as they come in. If you want a deeper dive into the Feeding Our Future indictment, the Housing Stabilization Program, or how federal and state agencies are trying to tighten those programs after getting burned, well, let me know. And share this video with someone who only sees the headlines and the hashtags. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.